Next is document control. The organization's quality management system shall include any documented information required by the standard and any documented information determined by the organization. So in other words, you make up the rules for this except for the 38 required pieces of documented information that are required by the standard. Speaking of documented information, I made you a list of the ones that are required in the standard. I've also included this in the supplemental materials. As we were saying, there are 38 of these in total. 7 out of the 38 are in design, which is nearly 20%. 5 out of the 38 are related to nonconformity or corrective action. So that's 12 out of the 38, or 25-ish% are related to those two things. 5 are related to changes that happen in the system. So here's a requirement for creating and updating documented information. It says, when creating and updating documented information, the organization shall ensure appropriate, and then it gives a list of these things too. Basically, it's up to the organization, i.e. namely you, to define what appropriate is. So you set up the rules for all of these things. Identification, format, review, and all the rest of the rules associated with that. Now, the purpose of this requirement is actually pretty simple. It just allows everybody to determine whether a document is real or not real. For example, what about sticky notes? Someone comes and writes a work instruction on a sticky note, do this, don't do that. Is that real or not real? Who wrote it? Who owns it? And should some employee follow it? Here's another failure mode. An introverted engineer walks up out on the floor and hangs up a lot of uncontrolled signs. Do not put stuff in this area, which is a work instruction. Does an employee know whether or not to obey that? Third failure mode, no identification as to who wrote it, how long it's valid for, or whether anybody should pay attention to it. I can't tell you how many dozen times I've walked into a place, there's been a work instruction hanging in a work area, and it's been there longer than anybody can remember, and the people involved in writing it are no longer around the company. And here's the last thing. It's been up here as long as I can remember, and no one follows it, which is namely, what's the process for going back and validating whether any of these work instructions are appropriate or not? And the answer is you have to come up with rules to do that. Next thing on this is control of documented information, and this goes for both the documents and the records. Basically says that documents shall be controlled to be available and suitable for use and adequately protected from changes. And in the next part, there's a whole list of things that you have to address in order to sufficiently address these requirements. Documents of external origin, that is to say, a document that you got from somebody else, has to be controlled in some fashion. And documented information retained as evidence of conformity, that is to say, test records or release records, shall be protected from unintended alterations. That's the anti-whiteout requirement. Next part of this is about record control rules. The first question is, what records do you require yourself to keep, and where do they get stored? Next question is, who gets access? Does anybody get access, and does it depend on the record? And how are they protected? People are still using paper records in some places, and that could be a file cabinet, it could be in a locked room, or it could be on somebody's desk. Next, what is a backup procedure? That is to say, if there's some kind of loss of your records, what are you going to do? Another question is, are there any external record requirements? For example, if you're Sarbanes-Oxley, you require yourself to maintain financial records for some length of time, and that also goes for your customers. So if your customers are Sarbanes-Oxley, they require you to retain the records for that same length of time. In a general way, what is a retention time for a record? And then once that retention time is exceeded, what's the disposal method? It's up to you to come up with rules for all of this. Here's another one for you. Documented information retained as evidence of conformity shall be protected from unintended alterations. What that means is that if you have any kind of test results or inspection results or anything similar to that, which is an inspection that you did your job, they don't want you to be able to go in after the fact and change it. So that means don't use whiteout, don't cross out, control access to your inspection data, and have a good IT backup procedure so that that doesn't happen. And that also includes the test specifications, because you can't go in and alter the test specifications either. Here's one more video for you, and it's the cookie story, and I hope you enjoy this because this actually happened to me.